have some extras.
So what I did,
So the topic for today is solar panels and fire risk. I know some people feel that could solar cause a fire, or if there was a fire. I've heard rumors that some fire chiefs say, hey, if you got solar, we're not putting out the fire, we're gonna let it burn to the ground, basically, because of the risk. And yet, you hear fire stations that have solar. So it's sort of a little bit of an ambiguous situation.
Tim, would that be an
Isn't it the
electrical
law they have
fire?
to put out a fire?
It could be caused by electrical, but if there was a fire for another reason and you had solar on your roof.
I mean, they
with
got
it.
the proper stuff on their truck for grease fires, electrical fires. I don't see why they wouldn't let it burn like that.
You know, and just think about the insurance consequences.
Right.
Could you imagine if I got, Mr. Insurance Agent, I got solar in my house, well, if that house, if you get a fire, your house is burned to the ground, obviously there's a lot more risk there, which means that the additional cost would be pretty substantial and probably prevent anybody from considering solar, because their homeowner's insurance
Would that be from like nothing neglect of taking care of it or whatever, or just old age or not being put in right?
If
How
you
would
read-
get
read
that
some of
fire?
this and not-
I don't ever hear of it.
I mean, if you read some of this, basically it's saying a solar fire is extremely rare, especially if it's installed properly. So it's very important that you pick the right person, much like, you know, somebody doesn't know what they're doing with HVAC or title insurance, so they didn't do the proper research, then obviously there could be risks associated with it. But some people just feel like, I don't want that risk, and I appreciate that. I mean, it's risk, even if it's 1/10 of 1%, it's better than zero. So, but it's
Due to
very
the
important.
proper installation.
Right, and there's all kinds of rapid shutdowns. If there is a fire, there's a handle on the side of the house that you can pull. You could do it through the app. So the risk is extremely minimal, and it's
Can you
getting.
put water on an electric fire? Like they're saying the wires and everything, the
Well,
electrical shop?
right,
can
if
you
you,
put
the
water
rapid
on?
shutdown would prevent it from conducting electricity, so yes, you would treat it anyway. Pretty easy. And then there's fire lane setbacks that every township has, almost every township. You need 3-foot pathway to the ridge, you need 3-foot pathway at the ridge unless you have fire suppression sprinklers, which again reduces the risk, therefore you can have a smaller pathway at the ridge. Years ago, you could have put solar on every inch of that roof. You know, so if somebody needed to get on the roof, it was very difficult because there's panels there. But yet, and this is due to fire code, but even firemen say, if we need to vent the house, we have a window, we don't necessarily need to open a hole in the roof.
I have a question.
Sure.
My carriers are coming out with memos saying we will not insure solar
Remember you
if
mentioned
it's
that.
over 50% of the roof. Is that due to they're worried about fire?
Could be,
I mean, I never called them that.
it could be.
Or the expense to replace all that solar. was
Would
now
you say it
big.
was more than 50% of the roof?
It's more than 50, they won't write it.
Most of the time they don't do, normally it's one side or the other, and half the roof is normally uncovered.
Well, I mentioned the fire lanes. There are two reasons why you don't need 3 foot at the ridge. Number one, you have fire suppression sprinklers, or the solar footprint represents less than 33% of the total square footage. So that's a reason why you can have a smaller path at the ridge. So what you're saying does make logical sense. I haven't heard that before, but that could be.
I'll ask them why,
Okay.
what their reason is. It could be money, really. It could just be the cost they feel it's too much to replace the solar. Even though I have to increase the coverage, when they do put solar, you do 40,000 of solar, I have to increase your house
Sure.
by 40.
So it was 100, then.
I'm not sure what the problem
So
is.
you would think the premium would just reflect whatever the cost would be? Yeah,
I'll
I'd be
find out
very
for you.
interested to find out. And it's only some of your carriers?
No, all of them now.
Okay.
At least, the two main ones.
Really?
I think the third one too,
How recent is that happening?
in the last 6 months.
Okay. That's interesting. I
Because
think-
you're almost always gonna have to pay out for the fire, you have to put the house fire
I mean, there are additional benefits to solar. I mean, you put solar on your roof, it strengthens your roof, it protects the shingles, which extends the life of the shingles. So there are some trade-offs there. It insulates the house, so reducing energy costs.
No, that's all good points, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And I have a picture of a house, a solar house that went through a hurricane, and the shingles are gone, but the panels are still there. So, you know, it's
seeing a lot more houses, I think they're called fire shields, that they're finally putting on the bottom edges of the solar so that it doesn't go up, is that?
They call that a skirting.
For sure.
Mixed feelings about that. Sometimes they say debris gets under there and it holds it there, so it's not very good for it. And also, it wants that ventilation underneath, so
Mhm.
some people like it for aesthetic reasons. I don't necessarily think that it's worthwhile.
I didn't know if that was code now or.
It isn't.
Isn't, so
No.
it's just aesthetic.
Yeah, yeah.
Just
So what?
one more thing for the salesman to sell you.
Yeah, pretty much. Some updates for me. I'm actually selling into Vancouver, British Columbia now. I don't know if you guys have any relatives in that area, but it's another expanding my footprint.
Oh.
Vancouver, British Columbia.
A British.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What do you think I said? Canada is very nice place for solar. They got a great loan program, 0% interest, no DD fee. Give you a $5,000 check after your system's installed. So it's an up and coming market for solar. So what questions do you have for me?
They're gonna be the new America anyway, so.
Yeah.
With the new administration, not with politics, has anything been heard that's gonna be hurting solar? I know they just nixed the whole wind farm off the coast. I don't know if they were trying to attack solar.
I have not heard anything specifically yet. I know that Trump had said those things before. Don't know why he says it. Does he mean it? Does he not? Is he appeasing a constituent group? Obviously Elon Musk is very pro renewables, so it's hard to know. It's really hard to know. And even if he wanted to, it would take an act of Congress, and that could happen. It may not. It's hard to know. Just got to sort of move forward with whatever the details are today and pivot. I did have some customers who moved forward last year specifically because they were afraid that the ITC was going away.
But in that same line, regarding the new administration, once again, not political, but the saber rattling about tariffs, especially when you said Vancouver, British Columbia, I was thinking about that. So both twofold. One, maybe your suppliers, but also your markets. Would that have is there any expectation if those were to come to pass that could impact the
Absolutely.
the pricing?
No, absolutely. It would absolutely impact everything. I understand, why it's happening. It's not necessarily to generate revenue, it's to protect the borders. So I think, it could be an important thing, and I think they paused those tariffs.
Correct.
Because
30 days.
the folks are saying, hey, let's figure this out so it doesn't impact us. As far as the Canada market, I don't think it would.
How about if energy prices, like he says, are gonna go way down a year from now? How's that going to affect the solar? Is it gonna hurt you guys?
I think so. I mean, I don't think, there's certainly peaks and valleys in the curve, but I don't think over time that energy prices are gonna go down. Especially when it's generated by a limited resource, I do think there's ups and downs, but I think the trend is always going up.
Do you think PSEG would get their gas cheaper? Do you think your rate's gonna go down?
I would hope so.
Good.
Yeah.
luck.
I don't think
The
it'll
good
go.
nature of human beings would give.
I believe in
something
kindness,
for free.
yeah.
Or any of the panels,
To
do you
give
know
you
companies
something.
that only buy the ones that
Do
are
the
made
right
in
thing.
America? Are there any made in America, or do we buy them all from out of the?
There's an equation that they use to, even though it may be constructed in America, most of the components are made overseas, usually in China.
I am absolutely for Buy America, Stop This, Joint Stuff, but I'm also an Amazon shopper. So I'm kind of a hypocrite, it's a 6 and 6.
Do you look to see where it comes from?
I try to, but a lot of it doesn't tell you where it's coming
They're
from.
getting slick about it.
So,
If they don't tell you, usually it's overseas.
if we all just stopped buying it, we wouldn't have to worry about tariffs or anything. We
I
just,
love people to talk about that though, because they sit there, they say, oh, buy American, buy American. Oh, look, I can get this from Walmart for 5 cents cheaper.
Sure.
It comes from China, I'm gonna buy it from Walmart.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's.
And even during COVID, I never shopped online, but I do. But I am just
Yeah, we-
curious, where
we-
do all those panels come from?
We vote with our dollars every day, for sure.
Exactly.
Do any of them make it in America?
Some of them are constructed in America, and sometimes, like, if you buy beef from Australia and you repackage it in America, they can stamp it made in America.
Yeah.
You know, so what does that really mean? All you really want is the honest truth, so you can make an informed decision, and it's very hard to get the honest truth. But generally speaking, almost nothing is completely made here.
If you want completely made American items, go to Mammoth Nation, and they are like Amazon, but they only have American-based companies. So that's important to you.
Based doesn't mean anything.
Made in America, they are very anti-overseas.
What state around that has the most solar? Is there one more
In this
than the
area,
other?
probably Jersey.
Jersey?
Yeah, in part because of the financial incentives, or the state incentive is stronger here than it was in CPA or Delaware.
Now, clarify, you and I talked about the capacity issue, so can you speak to that as far as, just to kind of refresh, as far as how they figure that out and maximize it? Because I think I shared with you that something that we were looking at, but we also may decide to buy an
Mhm.
electric car down the road, so
Okay.
I wanted to account for both your current capacity and potential future use.
Okay.
You may have a solar car also, I hear.
Well, that's the Aptera I
Yeah.
showed you. Yeah. Well, it's a hybrid. It's an all electric.
Yeah,
but
is it
actually
like
a
die on
solar
the highway
panels
when it starts
inside
raining
it.
or something, yeah?
So you're talking, the state incentive is called the SREC
No.
program, both in PA and New Jersey. In New Jersey, it was a much more robust program. At one time, an SREC certificate, which represents 1,000 kilowatt hours, was valued at like $700. And at the same time, in PA, it was valued at like $7. So you could see that it's obviously much more lucrative to go solar in New Jersey, just for that one reason, and not to mention the cost of energy in New Jersey
It's
is
like
higher.
double.
Well, it's not anymore. It's not anymore.
How long do they last?
Panels
The S-Racks or whatever?
in New Jersey, 15 years.
Because I got a customer I was at yesterday, and he had a meter in his basement, and I'm like, and he said, oh, this is for my solar. He says, I get $500 and something, $535 in an S-Rack, and I was like, he
He's
said,
probably,
we've had these for, he's on 15 years, he said. So he said he had them locked in. You could lock them in that.
he was probably part of the SREC 1 program, which means that it was a volatile SREC. It was valued at 700, as I mentioned, but it went down much like a stock. It closed a few years ago at 225, but it still can go up and down based on supply and demand. They transitioned to an SREC 2, or something called a SUSI. It's a fixed SREC. It's $85. It never changes, but it does end after 15 years. When you contrast that to PA, there is no, as long as it's producing power. That could change through legislation, but currently it's unlimited. It's as long as it's.
He said, I pay absolutely nothing. He said, I'm on a lease somehow, and the S-Rack pays the lease, and this, that, and the other thing.
See, at least you don't qualify for SRECs. The
Well,
leasing
that's,
company
well,
does. So
this is the problem with
I know,
solar.
I know.
People don't know what the hell they have.
I know. I deal with that when I lay off some price. What's on my friend, he's getting $8 million a year. He doesn't pay anything. They rent the stuff from him and he gets a check. And I'm like, can I talk to this person? Like, I'm sure that's what he thinks or you think, or a lot of it gets lost in translation.
Because he's telling me he gets a check for $400 something a month.
And he lives around the corner from us.
Yeah.
Years ago, you used to hear that though, that if you had extra and didn't use it, they could rent it to somebody else and pay you. Is that not right?
There's something called net metering, which means that as you produce power, if you're overproducing at that moment, the excess goes back out. It's basically stored by the utility. So at midnight, when you're not producing power, you're pulling back the power, you're not paying for it because you already produced it. It's called a 1-for-1 net metering. So every kilowatt hour that you produce has the same value as one that you buy from the utility. Eventually, that's going to change. Like in California, it's like a 1/3 to 1. So if you produce it, it goes back out to the grid, and then you pull it back, you're only getting 1/3 the actual value of it. So it makes sense to say, hey, maybe I should store it here, which means I buy batteries. So batteries make a lot more sense out in California than they do here.
But they don't resell that or rent that or use that extra energy to somebody else and pay.
It basically goes back out to the grid. It's used by somebody else, but they track that kilowatt hour and then say, well, you have 200.
It's not your electric. The electric you produce doesn't count.
Right. Just like if you subscribe to a wind power. It's not like the wind turbine is pumping power to your address. It just says 10% of these customers are on wind power, so we're gonna contribute 10% of the energy needs, even though we can't direct it to Charles's house. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm also saying, because and probably by the end of this week,
Okay,
we gotta get together.
Okay.
Because I'm going to leave them. I'm seeing this other thing where you can subscribe to a solar farm where it's not even on your house, it might be 5 miles away from you. Is that something that's been,
it's called community solar.
is that?
You need to be in certain proximity to wherever the farm is, so someone may be able to do it and someone else may not be. And typically it saves you about 20%.
I was just curious, because obviously I'm going with solar, and now everything that comes up on my timeline and everything that comes up my Google, all of a sudden comes up solar this, solar that.
Well, the value of that is someone who wants to save money, someone who wants to be green, but someone who can't go solar because their house just isn't good for solar. So they could benefit that way. But again, it's market forces. Like, just because it's solar and it's cheaper, and if they could get you to pay more, they're going to. You know, it's like that. Oh, when gas prices went up, they charged a 10% surge fee. They never took that away, even if gas prices came down. You're already paying it, so why am I going to take it away?
The whole thing, I'm getting a lot of these new 715 watt solar panels. I'm like, yeah.
I mean, you're always going to save more by doing it, putting it on your own roof versus.
Now that you're done, you just had a new roof put on, so good time to do it.
My thing is, I don't know what roof to put it on.
Do they limit in an area
Pole barn or.
how
Yeah,
much
I know what you
solar is allowed to be put out
They
there?
do. They do.
Because like, when we go to Vegas, you're driving down the highway and you're thinking, oh, look at that lake over there. And then you finally get up to it and you're like, oh my God, there's solar panels and there's millions of them.
Yeah.
And around us, they're building across from the base
I
another
know.
whole
Mark told me.
big
You may
thing.
get rejected. You may. So the transformers, when you're backfeeding the grid, the transformer has to be able to absorb that power. And they will usually installed without considering solar. So the more people that go solar, the less likely you are to be approved for solar. So it's sort of counterintuitive that when people say, my neighbor just went solar last week, or there's so much solar in this area, I should definitely be able to do it. Now that means you probably can't,
Okay.
because the grid just can't handle it. I have a customer in Delaware that they rejected it unless he wanted to pay for the upgrade.
Does that go by, like townships, or
It
does that
varies
go
by
by
neighborhood,
area?
by circuit. Like Mark said, that your barn is on a different circuit than your house. You
Yeah.
could get rejected on the house and get approved for the barn.
How do you find out if you're,
You have to apply for interconnection. AC Electric, which is probably where it's most common, where you get rejected, they have a website that you can go to, and they got red, white, black, red, orange, like what stage it's in. Black, it's closed. Don't even talk to that person because they can't go solar.
like Union County, we talked about that.
Right. JCP&L is part, or you know, your PSE&G.
PSE&G.
They don't, it's not as easy to track that, so what we would have to do is apply for interconnection and see how it came back. Once it's approved, you're approved. If it gets rejected, then we basically should, terminate the project
And let me tell you, if you wanna upgrade your system and JCP&L, you have to pay for the transformer on the poles, you have to pay for the lines, you have to pay for everything, but then they give you a credit on your bill for 10 years. So if I would have to upgrade my transformer, where the transformer would be upgraded, that's my problem, not JCP&L. What?
It varies by utility, by town, by state. Like I said, the Delaware guy, they said, oh, your bill's gonna be, or the cost's gonna be somewhere between $7,000 and $21,000.
Oh, okay.
That he has no idea what it's gonna be. How do you commit to something before you even know exactly what the figure is? And people resent it. They're like, I'm not, basically if I do this, then everyone in my neighborhood now can go solar, and I basically foot the bill for it. I don't wanna do that.
Do you have to upgrade if you have like a basic panel box, like
Maybe.
a lot of especially older houses, like 100 amp service, would you have to upgrade the panel box to address
Perhaps.
that?
That's part of the site survey, or at least learning every project, what the details are. An example is, you mentioned Canada. If you have a 100 amp service, you can only do 15 panels. If you have 200, you can do 30. If you have 225, you can do up to 44. So all those details matter. Every house is different. And Mark, you mentioned the meter in the basement. Years ago, there was 2 meters when you went solar. One was in, one was out. Now they accomplish all that
They're
with one.
two-way meter.
Right, it's a bi-directional.
Yeah.
And you mentioned JCP&L, they're as strict as they come in New Jersey. They basically, when we design a system, we submit for connection, they basically go to a website called PV Watts, which is the government-run website that basically tracks all the weather data and says, okay, this size panel with this wattage and on this house with this azimuth and this pitch will produce X. Now, some variables that are part of that is how much, are there trees there? Is there shade? They don't care. They're just gonna say in a perfect world without any shade, that's what this panel will produce, which they say is 100%, but you put a tree in front of something, then all of a sudden it's not 100%. They don't care. PSE is a little bit more
Last question.
flexible.
If the townships are able to limit it based off of the systems not being powerful enough to hold it, are they being held accountable either by the federal or state levels to increase those things as time goes on? Because you're going to have more people, more population, more houses, all that type of stuff. So wouldn't it need to be increased sooner or later?
Every year the mandate goes up.
Yeah.
So I mentioned that state incentive. That's driven by the mandated percentage of the portfolio coming from renewable sources. So every kilowatt hour that your system produces, the utilities count that. Hey, see, state, we are meeting our objective, and in return they pay those SRECs, whether it's to you directly or to a leasing company.
No, I meant like the transformers. Like, do they need to update
I don't know
those
all
for
legislation.
increased people?
If they upgraded for another reason,
Yeah.
if you were rejected in the past, typically they'll send you notice to say you tried to go solar last year, you couldn't, now you can. And
Okay.
I've seen grids open and close in a week.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's open again, let's apply. Oh, sorry, it's closed again. You weren't fast enough. So,
So let's go back to someone like Mark.
yes.
If he doesn't want it over his roof, and he says, I want one of those ground mounts instead, does he lose a lot? You're saying he loses efficiency with a ground mount?
It's a balancing act. Number one, you can get perfect pitch and azimuth, so it maximizes the production of the panel. But obviously, if it's 100 yards or 100 feet from the house, there is some loss from transmitting it from where it's produced to where it's actually used.
Okay.
You know, even when you look at high tension lines, like they say, I think you have to generate like 3 times the amount of power at the station that's actually arrives at the house. So that's lost through heat and things like that.
Just for a quick, from the transformer JCP&L, from the transformer I have to go to my pole barn is 276 feet. They have to increase the wire size because of the voltage loss. So that's where everything becomes over 250 feet.